Hi friends, this is LeanReads, where big ideas meet practical takeaways, all distilled from great books. Imagine looking back in 50 years and asking, did we do enough when we had the chance? We Are the Weather is a wake-up call, reminding us that the clock is ticking and that the most powerful tool we have lies on our plate. Want to explore more? Check out the link to the book down in the description. Alright, let's begin. We Are the Weather 2019 is a compelling and deeply personal exploration of climate change GITs, meaning its urgency, and why humanity often feels powerless in the face of it. Jonathan Safran Foer argues that while climate change is terrifyingly complex, there is one simple, practical action everyone can take. By avoiding animal products at breakfast and lunch, we can significantly reduce our environmental impact and help safeguard the planet. Far from being a book of abstract statistics, We Are the Weather is both philosophical and practical. Foer blends science, history, and moral reflection, weaving together global climate data with intimate human stories. He emphasizes that climate change is not just an environmental crisis, it is a human story, one that asks each of us to reconsider daily habits and cultural norms. Jonathan Safran Foer is an acclaimed American novelist and nonfiction writer. His previous nonfiction work, Eating Animals, became a New York Times bestseller and was adapted into an award-winning documentary produced by the Environmental Media Association in 2019. Foer is also a board member of Farm Forward, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting sustainable farming and plant-based diets. Known for his ability to blend narrative storytelling with ethical urgency, Foer brings both emotional depth and intellectual clarity to one of the most pressing issues of our time. This book reframes the climate crisis in surprising and thought-provoking ways. Why going fully vegan isn't the only sustainable answer, how smaller, collective actions can be just as powerful. How seemingly small acts of resistance, like changing what we eat, can ripple outward into sweeping cultural shifts. Why industrial agriculture is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, and what we can do to challenge it. Ultimately, We Are the Weather is not about guilt or despair, it is about empowerment. It asks us to rethink our routines, not in pursuit of perfection, but in pursuit of progress. Why climate change fails to inspire action. When we think of major political movements, we often recall them through powerful, memorable stories. The American Civil Rights Movement has Rosa Parks refusing to give up her bus seat. The anti-apartheid struggle has Nelson Mandela walking free after 27 years in prison, choosing forgiveness over vengeance. These stories have heroes and villains, clear beginnings and satisfying conclusions. The story of climate change is nothing like that. Its consequences are dispersed across the globe, unfolding in countless ways. A hurricane striking New York, or an island nation slowly disappearing under rising seas. They're connected, but how exactly? For most of us, the links remain frustratingly vague. That vagueness makes it difficult for people to engage emotionally. Research at Yale S. Cowles Foundation for Research in Economics shows that people respond most strongly when they can clearly picture victims. Millions are already affected by climate change, and hundreds of millions more will be in the future. But when there's no single victim to connect with, empathy falters. The scale of the crisis only deepens this disconnect. Abstract statistics, billions of tons of carbon, millions displaced. Catastrophic warming scenarios make climate change seem almost too massive, too frightening to believe. It's a psychological defense. We tune out because it feels unreal. Foer draws a haunting parallel to the Holocaust. Even as survivors tried to explain what was happening, that Jews were being systematically murdered, many could not believe such horror was possible. Human beings are not well equipped to grasp devastation on this scale. And yet, despite the vagueness, despite our difficulty in grasping it, climate change is a story we cannot turn away from. It is one in which all of us are participants, whether we like it or not. Why the human brain struggles with abstract threats. Imagine your child is dangling too far from a playground climbing frame, about to fall 2 meters. You would sprint to save them without hesitation. Now imagine someone tells you that something called climate change might affect your child's life decades from now in unimaginable ways. How would you respond? Most likely, you would do nothing. That's because the human brain evolved to respond to immediate, visible dangers, not abstract, long-term threats. Our ancestors survived by reacting swiftly to predators, hunger, and rival tribes. But we are not wired to respond with urgency to slow-moving crises like climate change. Psychological studies confirm this. Hal Hirschfield at UCLA found that when people were asked to imagine themselves 10 years into the future, brain scans showed activity in the same regions used when thinking about strangers, not themselves. In other words, our future selves feel as distant as other people. This neurological blind spot makes it nearly impossible to act on climate change. We must train ourselves to envision the Earth's future and to imagine what unchecked environmental destruction will mean for our descendants. But our minds resist that leap. Worse still, we are poor at remembering the past. Human beings adapt quickly to change, often without noticing it. We normalize record-breaking European heat waves every summer. We shrug off the increasing destruction of coastal cities by storms. We get used to each new normal, even when it is a worsening one. This adaptability kept us alive for thousands of years. But now, in the face of climate change, it may become our undoing. To survive this crisis, we must learn new skills, not only to react to immediate threats, but to anticipate and act upon dangers that are abstract, distant, and global. Confusion, contradiction, and the misinformation problem, even with the best intentions. Knowing where to start in the fight against climate change can feel overwhelming. That's partly because much of the information we receive is either misleading or incomplete. Take misinformation, for example. Evidence shows that major oil companies like Exxon understood the risks of global warming as far back as the 1950s, for more than 70 years. These corporations have known the truth, yet chose to respond by funding disinformation campaigns, publishing dishonest reports, and downplaying the dangers of burning fossil fuels. Environmental movements, in turn, often focused almost exclusively on fossil fuels, painting, oil drilling, and coal burning as the sole culprits of climate change. Fossil fuels are indeed a massive problem, but this narrow focus leaves out an equally destructive contributor: industrial agriculture. Agriculture accounts for about 24% of global greenhouse gas emissions, nearly as much as the 25% attributed to fossil fuels. The majority of these agricultural emissions come from industrial animal farming, which feeds humanity's insatiable appetite for meat. Yet this fact is frequently glossed over in environmental discourse. Al Gore's acclaimed documentary An Inconvenient Truth, for example, never even mentioned it. Why? Talking about eating less meat is controversial. Activists feared that raising the issue might alienate the public or weaken political momentum, so they avoided it. But omitting agriculture leaves people unaware of one of the simplest and most effective steps they can take to fight climate change, reducing their consumption of animal products. Meanwhile, society often encourages people to focus on actions that are symbolic but relatively ineffective. Driving a hybrid car, recycling diligently, planting trees, or buying organic food all sound good and they do help, but their impact is minimal compared to cutting back on animal-based foods. The result is a fog of contradictory advice. People are left unsure of what really matters. Foer argues that we must learn to question the guidance we are given and commit to actions that deliver genuine impact, not just a comforting sense that we are doing something. Why we need both top-down and bottom-up action. What can an individual possibly do in the face of climate change? Against titans like the oil industry, it's easy to feel powerless. What difference can one person marching in protest really make? It's a fair question. After all, we are often told that individuals cannot fix climate change because most emissions come from corporations. But corporations are not faceless machines. They are made up of people. And as consumers, our collective choices fund and legitimize their destructive practices. History shows that individual and collective action can influence even the most powerful corporations. In 2018, for instance, about 20,000 Google employees worldwide staged a walkout to protest the company's handling of sexual harassment cases. Within a week, Google yielded to their demands. Soon after, other tech giants like Facebook, Airbnb, and eBay followed suit, revising their own policies. Bottom-up action had forced change at the very top. Still, grassroots pressure alone is not enough. Climate change is too vast a problem. It requires top-down policy shifts, as well as government action in the form of carbon taxes, large-scale investment in renewable energy, and funding for climate research. The eradication of polio offers a powerful analogy. In 1938, U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt dedicated substantial federal funds to researching a cure. With this support, Jonas Salk eventually developed a vaccine. But the vaccine's success depended on one of the largest medical trials in history. 2 million volunteers stepped forward to test it. Their collective participation proved the vaccine safe and effective, paving the way for widespread distribution. The lesson is clear. Top-down support and bottom-up engagement are not rivals. They are complementary forces. Fighting climate change demands the same dual strategy: government leadership coupled with the everyday actions of millions of individuals. Neither alone is sufficient. Together, they can reshape the future. Industrial animal agriculture as a leading driver of climate change. When we imagine farms, most of us still picture idyllic scenes of cows grazing peacefully on green meadows. Rarely do we think of them as a major source of pollution. Yet industrial animal agriculture is among the largest contributors to global greenhouse gas emissions. Since the rise of factory farming in the 1960s, billions of animals have been raised in intensive, industrialized systems that place immense strain on the environment. The consequences are staggering. Take deforestation, for example. To make space for pastureland and to grow feed crops for livestock, vast swaths of forests have been burned to the ground. Because trees are made up of about 50% carbon, their destruction releases enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In fact, deforestation linked to animal agriculture accounts for around 15% of global CO emissions, roughly the same as all the world's cars and trucks combined. Worse still, once the forests are gone, they no longer serve as carbon sinks. leaving the atmosphere with fewer natural defenses against rising greenhouse gases. Livestock are also responsible for enormous emissions of methane and nitrous oxide, two of the most damaging greenhouse gases. Through digestion, cows emit methane in the form of burps and flatulence, while nitrous oxide is released through their urine and manure. The danger is not just their presence, but their potency. Methane has 34 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide, while nitrous oxide traps heat more than 300 times as effectively. From the 1960s through the late 1990s, as industrial agriculture expanded rapidly, atmospheric concentrations of methane and nitrous oxide increased more than during the previous 2,000 years combined. The conclusion is clear. Humanity cannot hope to confront the climate crisis without addressing our dependence on industrially produced meat and dairy. But food is deeply personal and culturally embedded. How do we change something so fundamental to our lives? The next step offers a surprisingly practical answer. Why skipping meat and dairy at breakfast and lunch can save the planet? The statistics on animal agriculture are alarming, but they also point toward a hopeful and achievable solution: eating less meat and fewer animal products. Reducing our consumption of meat, dairy, and eggs is one of the fastest and most effective ways to combat climate change. Unlike the transition away from fossil fuels, which, even under the most optimistic scenarios, would take decades to fully implement, changing what we eat can happen instantly. Every meal provides a new opportunity. Choosing tofu over steak, oat milk over cow's milk, or beans over chicken might seem small, but the impact compounds quickly when multiplied across millions of people. Critics sometimes argue that plant-based diets are a luxury, accessible only to wealthier households. But in reality, it is the mass consumption of meat that represents a planetary extravagance. Industrial animal agriculture requires 700 million tons of grain every year, enough to feed every hungry person on Earth. It also consumes about 1/3 of the world's freshwater resources. In a world where millions face hunger and water scarcity, funneling so many resources into raising livestock is not only unsustainable, it is profoundly unjust. So why not give up meat entirely? Why not embrace full vegetarianism or veganism? The answer lies partly in psychology and culture. Meat holds a central place in many people's diets, traditions, and identities. Asking everyone to give it up completely is unrealistic. By contrast, limiting animal products to just one meal a day makes the change far more manageable. More importantly, research from the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future has shown that people who avoid animal products at breakfast and lunch actually have a lower carbon footprint than many traditional vegetarians, who may continue to consume high-emission foods such as cheese, eggs, and milk. In other words, a flexitarian approach, 2/3 plant-based, 1/3 animal-based, can outperform even some stricter diets in terms of sustainability. This strategy is not about perfection, but progress. It allows individuals to reduce their impact without feeling deprived, and it has the potential to reshape cultural habits on a global scale. One skipped sausage or glass of milk at a time, we edge closer to a livable future. It's too late to prevent the crisis. But that doesn't mean we should give up. Earth often feels infinite, yet in truth it is a finite system with rapidly depleting resources. Humanity is living far beyond its ecological means, drawing down on natural wealth we can never repay. Since the 1980s, we have consumed resources faster than the planet can regenerate them. Deforestation provides a clear example of this imbalance. When we cut down trees, we not only release the carbon stored within them, nearly 50% of their mass, but we also strip the Earth of its capacity to absorb greenhouse gases. The result is a dangerous cascade. Fewer trees mean more carbon in the atmosphere, which accelerates warming, which in turn makes forests more vulnerable to fire and disease. Scientists call this dynamic runaway climate change, where positive feedback loops amplify the damage in unpredictable and devastating ways. The melting of polar ice is another vivid feedback loop. Ice naturally reflects sunlight, cooling the planet. But as the ice recedes, darker ocean waters absorb more heat, which leads to faster melting, more exposed ocean, and an ever-intensifying spiral of warming. We are already living with the consequences. Hurricanes, heat waves, floods, and wildfires are no longer predictions, but present-day realities. The disruptions we've experienced so far are only the beginning. Life will change more dramatically as the crisis deepens. Faced with this grim reality, it is tempting to despair, to fantasize about escape plans to Mars, or to simply give up. But morally, there is only one responsible response: to do everything within our power to fight climate change here, on this planet. We owe it to future generations, who will inherit the irreversible outcomes of our choices today. We owe it to the world's poorest communities, who contribute least to global emissions, yet bear the harshest and most disproportionate impacts. And we owe it to ourselves, because what distinguishes humans from other animals is our capacity to act, not just on instinct, but on reason and ethics. In the future, humanity will be judged not by the size of the problem we faced, but by the choices we made in response. Climate change is uniquely difficult to grasp. Its causes are complex, its consequences so vast that our emotions struggle to process them. Yet reason demands that we acknowledge the truth and act on it. Industrial animal agriculture is one of the most significant drivers of global warming. One of the most effective steps any individual can take is simple: eliminate meat and dairy at breakfast and lunch. Many people hesitate to engage with climate activism because they feel overwhelmed by the scale of change required. They imagine being told they can never fly again, must cycle 30 kilometers to work every day, or swear off steak forever. These absolutes feel impossible and discourage action. But small, realistic steps matter. Skipping 2 flights a year, carpooling with neighbors, choosing oatmeal instead of bacon and eggs. These may sound modest, but when multiplied across millions of lives, they become transformative. Reading We Are the Weather left me with a strange mix of unease and hope. Unease, because Jonathan Safran Foer makes it painfully clear how serious and irreversible the climate crisis already is, and how our daily habits, especially our reliance on animal products, contribute to the problem. But also hope, because his argument is not abstract or unreachable. It is grounded in the idea that small, consistent changes, such as eating differently for just 2 meals a day, can create meaningful impact when adopted collectively. What struck me most is how honest Foer is about human weakness. He does not scold or pretend that saving the planet is simple. Instead, he acknowledges that climate change is a story too big for our brains to process, and that guilt alone will never inspire action. Yet he reminds us that moral responsibility does not require perfection. It requires effort, persistence, and choosing not to give up. For me, the book was less about food than about agency. It made me reflect on how easy it is to feel powerless in the face of such a vast crisis, and how empowering it can be to take even a small, practical step. By the time I closed the book, I didn't feel like I had solved climate change. but I felt more accountable for my choices and more determined to treat them as part of something bigger. In the end, We Are the Weather is not only a book about the environment, it is a book about humanity, ethics, and what it means to live responsibly in a fragile world. It challenged me to rethink comfort, tradition, and appetite in light of a larger truth: that our collective survival depends on the seemingly ordinary decisions we make every day. This book is a powerful reminder that we, need to be perfect to make a difference. We just need to begin. Every skipped piece of bacon, every plant-based lunch, is a step toward a cooler, safer, and fairer planet. The future is not written yet, and our choices today can shape it.